Welcome back, everybody, to the Doc Talk podcast, produced in partnership with the Auto Rowing Club. I'm your host, Zach Lewis, and I started this podcast with the goal of fostering the community that surrounds the awesome sport of rowing through a variety of concise, insightful, and meaningful conversations with individuals from all around the rowing world. Rowers, coaches, and practitioners of the sport, both past and present, will join us to share their knowledge and stories with the goals of educating, inspiring, and motivating our listeners. We are pumped to have Alice McNamara on the podcast today. She is a decorated rower and internationally acclaimed stair climber, as well as a sports medicine physician. She's represented Australia for 11 seasons on the senior national women's rowing team and won back-to-back World Championship gold medals in 2007 and 2008, amongst many other top placings. She's a 7-time winner of the Race Up the Eureka Tower in Melbourne, which is a whopping 88 floors, as well as a previous winner of the Empire State Building run-up and the Willis Tower run-up in Chicago, the KL Tower in Malaysia, and Taipei 101. She more recently served as a sports medicine physician for Rowing Australia and is spearheading a number of female athlete-specific research studies with the goal of better understanding and supporting female athletes throughout their training journeys. It is my pleasure today to introduce to you Alice McNamara. And welcome to the show, Alice. It's great to have you. Good morning, I guess, for you in your part of the world. How are you doing?
Good morning. Thanks, Zach. It's nice to finally connect. I know we've been playing phone tag for a little while now.
That's all right. Where are you joining us from today?
I'm based in Melbourne in Australia. And you're right, it's 9:30 in the morning.
Lovely. Well, I'm happy that the time change worked out well, and it's not in the middle of the night for one of us. We're able to make it happen.
Awesome.
So usually when I have guests on, I try and get an idea of how they first got involved with rowing, kind of what caught their heart, what made them stick in it. I know that the Australian schoolgirls programs are fantastic. Is that where you kind of took your first strokes and got invested into the sport?
Absolutely. Yeah, you're right. Australia has quite a good schoolgirl rowing system, and particularly in Melbourne, where I'm from. We have the Yarra River that runs right through the middle of the city, and the boat sheds that line the Yarra River host a lot of the schools. And I just signed up in Year 9, like a lot of the schoolgirls did, because it was the sport it was sort of the fun sport, the team sport, the sport that everyone did. I had no idea that it would be physically so hard. So that I joined it for the reason that it was kind of the in thing to do, and I considered myself quite sporty. I would do like typical rower, like started off doing lots of running and basketball and surf lifesaving in Australia and lots of different sports. But rowing has something that does hook you, I think. And once I sort of got in a crew that gelled, we were very slow, and we weren't particularly good in our first year. In fact, I think I got demoted a few times because I was too keen. I didn't really get the fact of rowing in sync with everyone and the rhythm. So I think once I got the idea that this is a real harmony crew sport thing, and you are very integrally important to the team, I just got hooked really. And you get, it's addictive, isn't it? The efficiencies that you can create and working together and making the other people in the boat's life easier, not harder. So it is a hook. But it was, schoolgirl rowing that got me started.
Well, and rowing on the Yarra is such a cool place to get started. I mean, you're essentially, depending on where you're at along the river, in the middle of Melbourne. Your steps from downtown and the G and the university and everything else, it's something to look at. I mean, a lot of places in Canada, at least, are kind of remote. Even if you're rowing at a uni club, you're still 20 or 30 minutes from like the boat shed to campus. So you're looking at nothing, not feeling part of anything other than what's in the boat, as opposed to like having 1,000,001 distractions like you would have had.
I think in some ways that's probably better, because then you're actually clean, flat water, thinking about what you're doing. Rowing on the Yarra has its own skills. So when you're going upstream, you've got one blade in fast moving water and one blade in slow moving water if you're sculling. So you're sort of always managing moving water. You're always managing obstacles. And at this time of year, we've just got the Australian Open on the tennis, and there's always water taxis and ferries and things. So you got your head on a swivel all the time, just making sure you don't crash into anything. But it certainly is a real community atmosphere on the banks of the Yarra. And you're right, like you definitely feel the vibe of the city while you're training. So challenges from all sides, but it is fun.
Totally. And I think it contributes huge to the club rowing that you have there. I mean, Australia and the Netherlands and the UK seem to have this really strong culture of senior rowing, or athletes that kind of row beyond their undergraduate degree, where it's convenient to row because a lot of the big clubs, like whether it be MUBC or UTS or Sydney or wherever, are located in big cities next to schools in somewhat convenient locations where people can get there and still train, and that ends up being their go-to activity while they're going through the early stage of their professional career or while they're completing postdoc work or what have you. It's certainly an advantage to kind of having a boathouse that's so ingrained in the physical community around it.
Yeah, yeah, you're spot on. I think as a student, I found it really kind of convenient that home and university and rowing were all within a triangle, and I'd just ride my bike between the three sites. And I think as a student, that worked really well. I think if you were an early professional in the city, that would continue to work really, really well. I think there's often a hiatus. A lot of the female rowers, when they go off and have their kids, it's really inconvenient to get into the city first thing in the morning. So there's sometimes a break. But the nice thing about Melbourne clubs is that people come back.
Love
And
that.
you do find that, yeah, there is quite a strong masters contingent in the city. Rowing's not the most time efficient sport to do as a busy professional person later in life because you do have to get to the sheds and rig the boat and get it on the water. It's not like leaving the house and just going for a run and coming back. It does take time, but I think that social aspect and the other mindfulness parts of rowing is kind of what draws people back. You never take your phone with you. You always leave it in the boat sheds. And I think it's quite social. If you have a regular 8 or a 4 or a quad, then you know that crew's going to wait for you to turn up, and then coffee afterwards is always a plus. And we've got great Melbourne cafes right near the boat sheds, so works for us.
Absolutely. It's funny that for a sport that prioritizes efficiency so much on the water, it does seem to be one of the least efficient sports off the water, whether you're going to a regatta or changing the pitch on one person's oarlock or what have you. You're right. I mean, there's nothing convenient about showing up just to row at the club.
I have
But
not missed boat
you
loading in the last few years, I will say that.
you haven't missed?
No, I
Good for you. I mean, that's got to be pretty incredible with
sorry.
your schedule, which we'll jump into. But so you've spent several seasons as a member of the Melbourne Uni Boat Club, which is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, boat club in Australia, I believe. It's also been home to some pretty exceptional rowers. I mean, even just recently, teammates of yours, Kim Brennan, Josh Booth, not to mention Connor Grace. Before that, the Orson Foursome. Can you tell us a little bit about what it's like rowing for MUBC, what made it so special, and kind of some things that might be specific to that particular club?
Yeah, definitely. It's a club that's got a great legacy, and certainly the president for a long time, Peter Anthony, was a real inspiration in terms of sort of what he did as a very small heavyweight rower and winning some Olympic gold medals. He's standing on the podium looking like a lightweight, but he's right up there. And he was an advocate for success in sport and life. So success in your rowing, but also a career outside, because the rowers tend to be, relatively thinking people and ambitious people, and it's often like, you want to have a career and also your sport too, just because those two things balance really well. So it's got a really strong balance of life kind of culture, and yeah, it's I guess there's been really good opportunities to row for the universities. University of Melbourne races, University in Sydney at the boat race. We've often sent crews over to Henley.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a kind of contagious thing, isn't it? That you have if you walk into the sheds and you have Olympic gold medals walking around the sheds, then it's sort of an accessible thing that for a young person coming in, you think, well, this is a sport that if I do what they're doing, I can get there. It's less of a distance from the beginner to the elite in some sports, like say elite basketball, where you never train alongside the elite people, where it's got the power difference or the experience difference level is far less. I
Of
suppose
course.
it's like a lot of really great clubs around the world have got the same thing. Rowing is a small community.
Now, in Australia, or while you were training, did athletes that were a member of the senior team or part of the senior team go home for X number of months a year, or would they go home on weekends? I mean, I'm assuming you guys have a lot of the same geographical challenges, that we do in Canada with such a big country. It might be easier to get from a training center to Melbourne than, say, if you're going to the Northern Territories or Perth or Tassie or somewhere else.
Yeah, that's right. So Melbourne is quite accessible from a transport point of view. You're right. We do have huge problems in Australia, like Canada, with big geography. And that was always when I was rowing. So to be clear, I rowed from 2005 to 2015 on the Australian team. And during
Yep.
that period of time, we were essentially decentralised. There were some crews that were based at the Australian Institute of Sport in Canberra, And when a national team crew was selected, they would train in a capital city where the coach was based or where the majority of the crew were from for the international
Yep.
preparation. So in that way, we often had a period of time at home and a period of time in another centre, and that might have even been your centre before you travelled overseas. But it is different now. They're trialling a couple of Olympic seasons of Olympic periods of the centralised model, because the funding model means that they can set up a training centre, and it does allow people to spend more time in one place and treat it like a full-time job. It's got pros
Yep.
and cons. I think we do ask our athletes to be there for a lot of years, sort of 2, 3, 4 Olympic cycles before you really get the best out of them. So I think it is challenging to move for that amount of time, particularly if it's in a place where you can't also work or have your family and things like that. We
For sure.
found when I was rowing that often it was, as long as you had a small team of really dedicated people in one place, often you did really good things. And my crews were always quite small with the lightweight double or the lightweight quad. So we found that as long as we had a dedicated coach and a really passionate group of people, in a couple of months of the year, you could create something really special. You just had to keep it going when you were apart.
Yep, absolutely. And keeping that momentum going at distance is integral to making the team faster when you're not together.
Yeah, it is. And I had a doubles partner when I was 2015 and 14 who was a medical student same time as I was. And we often had to train in different cities and come together. And often the efficiency of coming together for a long weekend really means that you get it right in 3 days, because you know you're going to have the next 3 days apart. We did a lot of travelling between Melbourne and Tasmania. And I think Ella and I would say that model wasn't ideal, but really we did get the best out of each other given what we were both doing at the same time.
For sure, bringing it back to that optimization, right? Nothing is convenient often on the water when it comes to our sport.
No, that's right.
Now, while rowing at MUBC and afterwards, you were selected to a number of development teams. I'm not sure if you actually did under 19s, but you were selected to an under 23s team, and then some open teams afterwards, or senior teams, depending on where in the world you're from. World rowing being predominantly a European sport, which, in addition to the domestic geographic challenges that Canada and Australia has, also poses a lot of challenges for countries that are outside of Asia or outside of Europe, that are in Asia, Oceania, or the Americas. Can you talk a little bit about the rigors of those seasons? I mean, going from a university student, undergrad, to a med student, while trying to complete residency and all the other things that kind of go along with it, as well as being a national team rower who's expected to be in Europe for X number of months or so many times a year. What did that mean to not only your athletic career and your preparations, but also your professional preparations?
Yeah, you're right. So it is quite a big thing to send an under 23 team over to Europe to compete from Australia. So New Zealand have the same issues as we have. Rowing Australia has done it for a lot of years, so they have a fairly good model, and the pathways system through Rowing Australia now is set up around selecting a good team, knowing a few months in advance that they're going. So selections are usually in March, February, March,
Yeah.
by the time they finish things off, and the team will usually leave in July. It's a challenge financially. So those athletes that aren't currently in training in the national centre but are selected on the team often have to raise an amount of money. Now, that was a reasonably big price tag when I went. I can't imagine what it actually is now for those athletes that
No
go. So
kidding.
the clubs do a lot to help fundraise, and the universities are also sort of step in a little bit sometimes if you're lucky. But a lot of it was driven by the athletes. There were, different kind of raffles that they would run, and going to the MCG on football days and shaking a can to get money. Like rowers have done everything to get themselves over to the under 23 worlds. My first World Championships was in Amsterdam in 2005. I was really lucky to be selected with my club coach, Tim Dolphin, and I rowed with a girl from Perth, Jess Huston, and we went over and raced a lightweight double and got a bronze. At that point was pretty exciting, so very addictive to
Yeah,
kind
no
of keep
kidding.
on going.
That'll hook you early.
It was fantastic. We got to train in Varese in the lead up. Australia have a training centre in Italy at the ETs, the European Training Centre it's called, which is at Lago di Varese, which is where some of the British team train as well. It's quite popular now, but very fortunate to have that as a base. So we trained there and then went to Amsterdam. It was a great trip.
Yeah, no kidding. Especially as what you were 17, 18 the first time you went?
Yeah, I was maybe 18 or 19, quite young. Under 23s
Oh,
was Pretty exciting.
Yeah, no kidding. So this training center in Italy, is it does the Aussie team use it as a base? Like if when the senior team were to go over, if you guys, I mean, similar to Canada, oftentimes the Aussies, the Kiwis, even some of the Asian countries don't typically race World Cup one, and we'll kind of get into the World Cup World Champ outline of a season, but just due to the geographic distance or the challenges that come with it, oftentimes you'll see countries from further away kind of go and centralize in Europe for 2 or 3 months as opposed to the 5 months that can often span the entirety of the FISA season. When you guys were to go over there, would you have a team that would centralize in Italy, stay there, kind of do a World Cup 2, go back to a training camp, and then go to World Cup 3 or World Champs?
Yeah, exactly right. That has been the model. So to target a cup in the senior team, particularly to target 1 or 2 World Cups and then the World Championships, if they're all in Europe, is usually a great way to get a couple of lead up regattas, a really good training block in a beautiful location, good water, no other distractions as well. So we actually
For
move
sure.
the team to a bubble in Varese and you just get things done. Lucerne is obviously a really lovely, checkpoint hit out against crews that are just coming up to be where they need to be prior to the World Championship. So it's a good measure for us. But yes, typically we have used Varese as a base. It was finalised and built, I think I'm going to say in 2011-ish. We trained there prior to that for quite a few years, staying at Hotel Continental, which was just
Yep.
a hotel on the side of the lake. So we kind of already felt like we had it as a home before the AIS built the centre. But I really wanted to touch on this point in that the AIS sets up some great support staff at the European Training Centre. So you have your sports medicine services on site, you have your physiotherapy, you have contact with the they're called the performance lifestyle team now that look after athletes and how they balance their school and study back home. So you've got a full setup there with, gym, ergo room, medical setup, and they've also got some full offices and study spots for athletes as well. So you can actually live there for a couple of months, study abroad, get your training done. Dining hall's fantastic. Coffee machine on site, it's really good. But I wanted to just say that the taking under 23 athletes and taking them overseas for long periods of time, it takes a team, and so we often have support from the Australian sports system is set up into state institutes. So where I am,
Yeah.
the Victorian Institute of Sport puts a team around the rowers and they help organise like exams to be done when you're overseas and study to be done. They help with university arrangements and things. So that's how I was able to get through a medical degree while I was rowing, is I had really good support from the institute and the university to kind of juggle the two.
No kidding. Just alleviating all the additional stress. That those are some fantastic intangibles that the AIS has stepped up and done. I don't know if other countries do that, but it's fantastic to hear that the Aussie athletes, at least then, and I'm sure now it's only gotten better, but have that backing so they can focus on rowing and rowing alone. Now, 2 years after your under 23 debut with Jess, you were able to make the senior light quad and won back-to-back world championships in 2007, 2008, I believe, as a 19-year-old for your first one. Now, both of these are great races, but very different ones. I mean, watching them online, 2007, you guys are out front and then nobody touches you. 2008, it's a heck of a race. Anybody hasn't seen it should go check it online. I'll post a link or something in the show notes. But heck of a comeback in the last 700-800 meters of the race. But can you talk a little bit about how the approach, either mentally or physically, might have changed between 2007, where you're going from this newly christened senior team rower to world champion, and then all of a sudden you're coming back a year later to kind of defend that title?
Yeah, it's some really nice memories to look back on, actually. So, yeah, we had a training crew in Sydney for the first one. So it's 2007. Selected as a just one lightweight quad. There was a separate lightweight double that was selected that trained in Adelaide. So they were training for the Olympic qualifying regatta, and we were training as the non-Olympic boat, same regatta, which World Championships were in Munich that year in 2007. We had a 3-month preparation in the boat.
Yep.
Ellen Randall was our coach. She still coaches at the National Training Centre. Fantastic technician. She put more volume into us that year than I've had before. And we stayed injury free. We had a real sense of rowing the quad well. We had a rhythm that was very, very good. Like, I think once we got out in front against the Chinese in 2007, I just had no doubt that we would row away. Like, it was a really strong quad rhythm, and probably when you find that, you're learning every year at that age, but I just feel like I learnt so much that year about how to move a big boat. I sat in the 3-seat. I've trusted my stroke seat, Tara Kelly, like nothing else, and I backed her up. I did not look out of the boat, and I just remember my job is to just back her up, put the power in 3-seat, and pass the rhythm back. That's my one job. So it was a textbook season, really, in terms of an uninterrupted 3-month preparation. Yes, we had troubles with some weight-making stuff in the crew, but really we put everything into that performance. The lightweight double from Australia qualified first for the Olympics. They won in 2007, so they were pre-selected for the Beijing Games. And then we went back to the drawing board to reselect what might be the reserve and the reserve boat. I went off the momentum of that, and I won the nationals in the single in 2008, preparing for 2008 Olympic year. But I think because I had run off the back of such a great World Championships experience, I knew that the double definitely deserved their job to go to the Olympics. They just won the qualification regatta. So I would wait my turn 4 years, and I felt like, okay, our job is to just get this quad going again. Let's go back to back. And I also had the fortunate experience of getting to go to Beijing as a reserve. So then I was sort of a leader in the crew for that second time around. We had one crew change. We had a rib injury in that boat in the lead up, and it was just a shorter preparation interrupted with some injury. I think we had a bit of a seating change as well. I ended up in the stroke seat, which I actually don't think that's a strength of mine. But anyway, I had the keys that year, and we hadn't really done a standing start in the lead up to the World Championship race because of our injury in the crew. So we'd done most of our stuff running. We knew we were strong, but we definitely weren't a dominant force, but we were pretty determined on the day. So the World Championships in 2008, the non-Olympic Worlds, was with the junior team as well. It was in Austria, in Linz. So, yeah, and the water's a bit different. It's on the edge of the Danube River, and you do the 2K race, and then you have to check the boat at the end before you run out the side and onto the river. But, yeah, also a really exciting trip. I then came back, trained with the Olympic team for a couple of weeks, and then went over to Beijing with the team.
Heck of a year, 2008.
Was busy.
Yeah, no kidding.
Learning year, though.
So for our listeners that aren't aware, most rowing back nations break down the rowing world, I guess, into quadrennials, or 4 years that kind of lead up to the penultimate Olympic Games, which is in the 4th year. There's usually 3 seasons leading up to it. Often in the first year after Olympics or second year, they kind of take on younger athletes in a development opportunity, kind of put them in various boats, give them an opportunity to go race World Cups and World Championships, which are not the same thing. There's usually 3 World Cups. They count towards certain points. Then a World Championship, which is the cumulative event at the end of the season. Anybody can go to a World Cup. Lots of countries race multiple boats, multiple crews in the same category, sometimes doubling up or tripling up rowers. And then once you get to a World Championship, it's 1 boat per country. And the year prior to an Olympics, there are a certain number of boats that qualify for an Olympics. So in the light double, I believe, or in all the doubles, 2-person boats, I think it's 11 boats qualify in a World Championship year, the year for Olympics, and then there's last chance for the last 2 spots.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, coming out of 2008, like you said, despite your crew being lightweight world champions, the lightweight women's double won as well. So you mentioned they pre-selected that crew. In 2011, I guess, which would have been qualifier for London, and I apologize if this is picking at an old scab. You and your partner won world championships in the double, or qualified the boat in the double, I apologize, for the next year. What was the selection process like for the London Games? Because it obviously wasn't a pre-selected boat like the previous quad.
I know. I sort of missed out on the pre-selection. I was on the wrong side of it, both Olympic cycles. So essentially, we had won the World Cup in Lucerne, and that's just before the qualification regatta. So I'd say it's a hot standard World Cup. Hannah Everyhall and myself. So we had a pretty good Olympic quadrennium until that point. Well, it was including 2011. So we won the World Cup in Lucerne, and then in beautiful Linz. Where were we? Bled, Slovenia. Gorgeous Bled, Slovenia.
Also beautiful.
More beautiful, one might even say. Amazing place. I don't know that there are many that match it. We qualified. We won a semi-final, a very tough semi-final against the Greek lightweight double at that stage were also extremely strong, and Lindsay Jonick was kicking around with, I think, Go B that year. I think
Yeah.
that was their first Olympic cycle as a double. And Hannah and I had a great Olympic qualification. We came fifth in the final. I think we probably raced the race of our regatta in the semi, which was the more stressful race for us. Once you're in the final, you're qualified, right? Because it's 11 boats,
Yep.
so the top 6 are definitely going. So I think that semi-final was really where it was at. We nailed that, and we probably spent all our adrenaline getting through to the final and probably didn't quite finish it off. So we were fifth. So we didn't win that regatta, but being fifth and getting the boat through meant that Rowing Australia still thought maybe there's room to move it around. So they didn't pre-select it that year. And so we had 4 of us go to Canberra that year, and we ended up training at the AIS. And it was quite tight between all of us. But it came down to some ergos and a selection regatta. And I still to this day don't quite know how they didn't pop me in the boat for the Olympics. And it's just one of these experiences that it wasn't fair, I don't think, and it's never going to be fair. But really, it's probably a learning experience for life. There isn't some things in your control and some things aren't. So I was second in the single and second in the seat race matrix, second on the ergo, and then I was in the quickest double overall, but with one of the other girls. So on all my numbers, I would think probably they should have just kept the double the same, but they did move it around anyway. It's
Sometimes logic doesn't work when you're doing selection, and I'm sure that that politics that comes along with selection has, like you said, ends up being a lesson for life. I'm sure there are politics in your professional career now, being at the hospital, because they're as big as they are. There's always going to be differentiated interests, I guess.
Yeah, I think I did share it a couple of times, but I came back home and had to tell my university professor who was at Royal Melbourne Hospital that I didn't need the Olympic year off anymore because I wasn't going to the Olympics. And he took me for a coffee and he sat me down and said, "Oh, this is your first time where you've worked out that you're probably qualified for a job, but you haven't got it." That happens a lot in medicine. So, yes, I did learn that role pretty early, but we're all going to learn it at some point, aren't we?
That must have been a pretty challenging conversation to have as well, though, right? I mean, where you're at with your training, you're now 7 years into the senior team. This was the goal, and it didn't work out, despite you having done everything you could have, despite being on paper, I should be on the boat. I can't imagine how that must have felt, and how did you approach that?
I think you feel mostly bad because you know you've asked a lot of favors of a lot of people for a long time, and you feel a bit guilty that maybe you've led them astray, that you weren't quite where you needed to be. And in hindsight, that's not where it was. But at the time, guilt was the most powerful emotion. Was that I felt really bad that I had probably taken advantage of his generosity over the last couple of years, like missing a lot of tutorials and asking for extra help and moving assignments around and things like that. It's a bit of a juggle to do medicine and roll at an elite level, and he'd been really good, and so had a lot of the other lecturers, and I'm sure they supported me because they saw other things. They didn't just want me to go to the Olympics. It's actually a journey process, right? But
For sure.
I did feel guilty. And I was blown away really by his empathy. Like he kind of just got it straight away. And it's a perspective of someone older and wiser. When you're the athlete and your head is, this is the only thing in my life that matters right now, you don't see that. But him, older and wiser, having much more life experience than I had, said, I know that's really tough, but you know what? There'll be more tough times like that. I found that quite powerful. So I think that helps now. I mean, I'm now working with athletes, and I remember that experience most days of the week, that sport, you need a lot of luck. You do need to be lucky. So sometimes
Absolutely.
you just need to be there for people when it doesn't go their way.
Yeah, I think, I mean, again, one of the very valuable lessons that kind of came across from your rowing career that I'm sure a lot of people can apply in their career, regardless of whether they're involved in sport or not. Speaking of being involved in sport, so after rowing, you took up a very atypical sport of stair climbing, and in true Alice fashion, you were competitive and exceptional right from the get-go. Now, I know next to nothing about this sport, but from what little I've read, in a very short period of time, even in fact, while you were rowing, you won some of the biggest stair climbing races going, including an Empire State Building Challenge, the Kale Tower in Malaysia, another one in Melbourne. kicking myself for not writing the name down like 10 plus times. How did this come about? As
Um,
if rowing didn't hurt enough, you decided I'm going to go run up hundreds of flights of stairs.
yeah, it's well, I suggest if you've got rowers listening, they'll find that they'll be quite good at stair climbing if they give it a go because it is the same physiology, right? So to climb up a building, and my first race was in Melbourne up the Eureka Tower, which is 88 floors. Um, it took me 9 minutes 22 on my best time. So if you're
Mhm.
trying to train for like a 7-minute race, it's the same energy system to just push it to 9 minutes. So it's the
Yep.
same duration of race, same intensity, and I entered it as a fluke. Like we had a charity approach the Victorian Institute of Sport and ask if they could put an athlete team in, and the marketing manager was an ex-rower, and she just said, "Can you guys put 4 people into this race, please?" And Kim
She's
Brennan,
like, the rowers are the only ones sick enough to do it, so I won't ask any other sport.
yeah, I'm glad she did because Kim Brennan and I and 2 of the guys did a race like a team of 4, and we all started together. And it was in the middle of the field, so there were just punters everywhere. Good on them for getting in there for a stair climb, but it's not that scenic. Like you're in a concrete stairwell, and I just felt quite nervous that someone was going to have a heart attack in front of me. Like there was a lot of exhausted breathing, so I just tried to get out of there as quickly as possible, and I ended up
Yeah,
sitting.
being the resident physician, you would have had to stop and help somebody out.
Yeah, well, they had a medical team. I wasn't working that day, but I just wanted to
Okay, good.
get out. It was sweaty and hot and gross. So I was up behind Kim, and then we were doing 2 stairs at a time in a good rhythm. And I just sort of thought, I was going to go around you and keep going to the top, which I've never been Kim Brennan at anything else in my life, but certainly being a lightweight rower at the time, probably the vertical aspect of it is quite helpful to be your power to weight ratio. So yeah, I
Yeah, for
got to
sure.
the top and was told later in the day that my team time was actually the quickest time of the day. So they gave me the winning prize, which was return flights to New York, 5 nights staying
Awesome.
in a nice hotel, and a race in the Empire State Building run up, which was the next year.
Cool. And so I'm assuming that was when you went to New York. And have you been once? Have you been multiple times? Are you like resident champion now? Is there a
I
target on your back when you show up?
I wish there's actually a fantastic stair climber, Susie Walsham, who's won it 10 times. So she's the one with the target on her back. But the year that
Okay.
I won, she just had a baby. So she was on her return back. So between the 2 of us, we've done quite a lot of races, as friends, but also competitors overseas. And so I did win it in 2011. I went back the next year, but because of the university year in rowing, I was still training. I actually shifted my prize. I asked if I could go and do the Willis Tower in Chicago instead. So I went over and did that one. Um, I think they're the 2 races I've done in the US. That's it. And then I've done, like Typo 101 and some of the Asian races on the vertical world circuit as well. So I found it was a really good outlet, especially when I'd stopped rowing and I was doing my residency years in the hospital. To have a
Hmm.
4-day trip where you'd go over to Hong Kong and do a race and come back was so exciting.
Very cool. And you've raced to the Eiffel Tower has one as well, right? That
Yeah,
you've done?
I've come second up the Eiffel Tower run up to Susie Walsham. The last time we were there was in 2019.
Oh,
So cool.
fantastic. I mean, what a cool way to see the world too. I mean, what an excuse to travel to these, places that may not necessarily be at the top of your bucket list.
Yeah, no, certainly. I've definitely lived the dream on the stair climbing ticket there. COVID really shut that down, so we didn't travel much during that time, and now my work has definitely stepped in place of the travel. So I haven't really done much since 2019. But I found after rowing, and some of your listeners might, really relate, is that you have such a high level of physical fitness when you're rowing, and it's
Hmm.
just what you're used to having. You're just used to being quite fit, really healthy, used to training multiple times a day, which for the general punter is not normal. That's not a normal level of exercise. And
Yep.
your part of your brain is wired around doing the training, like you actually need the endorphins and the adrenaline, and you feel much better if you're fit. And I just found in terms of working that you have to find a time efficient way of getting that. And so I found often that stair climbing was a way that while I was coming off my rowing high and my rowing fitness in my career, if I did a bit of stair climbing in the week, I got that buzz that you get. It's really hard to climb up a building 2 stairs at a time. and you do reps of that, and it's like you've done an interval set on an ergo. But often I could take a friend with me. We'd go into a building in the city and we'd do the stair climbing together. And so it's social as well. So I found it quite a good training method. And of course, met some awesome people while we were traveling.
I'm sitting here just like racking cross-training ideas across my brain now. I'm sure the team's going to love it when we go and decide that we're going to run some stairs at the school. But hey, that's on them. I'll blame you. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, well, we say running, but actually it's all about the power hike. So 2 stairs at a time, just using the handrail. Your heart rate goes up no matter if you're not running.
Oh, I bet. Now, you did talk about your career afterwards, and all of your sporting accomplishments aside, the byproduct of the many years at MUBC crescendoed into your current career in sports medicine. You've had some phenomenal opportunities to kind of synthesize your love for sport and your professional career in some of your recent positions as the Pathways Medical Lead for Rowing Australia, as well as a team doctor for one of the AFL teams in Melbourne, or women's AFL teams Melbourne. Now, you are a very open advocate for women's health in sport and kind of just as a whole. I know there's probably a lot to talk about, but what are some of the initiatives that you're currently working on in your field with respect to female athletes or just women's health in general?
Yeah, I'm a huge advocate for women in sport, and also about women in sport and being able to do it for a long time as well. I think rowing does it really well. I know that there are issues with young female rowers and being pushed at times when maybe we haven't quite got the balance right yet. But I think rowing in general is a sport that girls take up when they're teenagers and they keep doing it through their university years rather than some of the other sports that maybe they did when they were younger and they drop off. So I think in terms of the club system and the social aspect and the physical fitness side of it, I think rowing does it quite well. I felt like I was part of something as an athlete, and I think you got a really good holistic training into you. So it wasn't just, cardio like running or whatever like that. You actually did lots of strength, and a lot of the loading that you did was non-weight bearing, but it was very cardiovascularly quite hard. So I think, yes, rowing, we do have medical problems, but I think it breeds strong women. So I think having that as a background means that then, and I am keen to do more with my sports medicine in rowing, but in the last few years, I've actually done quite a bit in other sports because it is good to broaden yourself as an early sports physician. So I've worked with Swimming Australia this year, where I went over to the Commonwealth Games with the swimming team. That was with the Olympic team and the Paralympic team. And then I also did the World Short Course Championships with them too. And I also look after AFL, which is our local football league, which is our most elite sport in Australia. Everyone has an AFL team that they support. But the women's league, the AFLW, has really come up in leaps and bounds. They're up to season 8 now, and it's becoming more and more professional each year. I look after one of those teams with another doctor. And I also, she introduced me to the club as the head doctor, but I assist her. And I take the lead on one of the basketball teams as well. So I've got a WNBL team.
Oh, fantastic.
That's a really cool thing because we've got 3 mothers in the team. So 3 of the players have young kids running around. So it's great to see the comeback and female coach, and it's been quite inspiring. Some of the initiatives in Australia that we've had is the AIS has started up this Female Performance and Health Initiative, which is an all-inclusive platform aimed at research, information, education, and just hearing feedback from athletes about screening for athlete health, providing some solutions to issues that female athletes have had for a long time and haven't been able to talk about, upskilling our sports medicine doctors and our physios to be able to screen for these problems. And so the research is slow. Only 6% of research in the past 20 years in sports medicine has been done on females, only female athletes, which is a very small stat. So we need to grow that pool of knowledge, but then we also need to be able to disseminate the information to sort of drown out some of the myths that float around social media about periods and women's health. So I'm really excited I've done a bit of research in how the females perceive their menstrual cycle to affect their performance, and we published that in the British Journal of Sports Medicine, the Open one last year, and currently doing some more stuff about validating some knowledge-based questionnaires about educating young athletes about what they know about their menstrual cycle and how they can use it to, knowledge is power, so how you can use it to actually understand how you're going to perform. And for some people, most female athletes, it actually won't be a factor for them in terms of their performance, but they just need to understand how to manage symptoms, because no one should be in pain or have discomfort and have to just put up with it. We actually need to address some of the things that do hold female athletes back.
Now, are there any significant findings from the initial research that might be worth sharing with some of our young female athlete listeners, just about what can be effective to their performance or whatever they're doing with their day-to-day training as is?
I think it's mostly just important to acknowledge that 2/3 of our elite athletes think that their menstrual cycle affects their performance. They also, most of them will say, that might be the case, but I can't change the date of the World Championship, so I'm just going to do it anyway. So most of them manage to perform at both times of both sort of phases of the cycle, whether it be in your low hormone phase or your high hormone phase. We still need more, mechanistic information about how it might affect your performance in terms of some of the markers. There's a lot out there that's saying that we know how it does, but we actually don't yet. But we do know that athletes perceive that it does, so it's worth continuing to look into it. You do need to find a good doctor who you can speak to about managing it. So, there's multiple options in terms of pain relief, hormonal, contraception options and things like that. Just practical things like, speaking to the clubs about not wearing white shorts when you have a female team. It's not really that, or white suits if you're Italy. I think they're hopefully going to phase those ones out. They wouldn't have been fun for the female athletes. So I think just little things that the clubs can do and that athletes can sort of seek out their own individual advice from reputable people.
Fantastic. One of the questions that I've got has to do with the tumultuous schedule that we've got here for a lot of our student athletes. So just where the vast majority of Canadian universities sit longitudinally, we have to do most of our training in the morning. Just the way course schedules work out, I'm sure it's not dissimilar from a lot of other parts of the world, but just to maximize the amount of sunlight we've got and to make sure that our crews are on site at the same time, a lot of our training goes on first thing in the morning, often launching at 5 o'clock or 5:30, depending on your program. But having been a student athlete for so long, having juggled so many things, what are your thoughts anecdotally and then as a sports medical professional for the effects of minimal sleep and trying to be a full-time athlete, trying to be a full-time student, all the things that kind of go along with being a university age student athlete or perhaps a postgraduate student that's looking to kind of perform at the next level?
Yeah, good question. And I wish I was a better example of this, because I probably didn't get a lot of sleep at the right times. And I probably still don't, personally need to focus on that myself. But, also I've functioned fine of multiple decades of probably sleeping enough, but not your 8 hours a night, I would say. If I get 8 hours, it's a good night. I think the early morning trainings, it does provide the time that a student athlete needs, though, because there is a huge commitment in terms of the study during the day. If you do the morning training, it's probably the most efficient time to get on the water and get it done and then go to uni. The key is finding recovery time outside of that. So it's actually a bit of hygiene at night time, so you don't need to be on your device until late at night, because, just put it away. You're doing enough amazing things in your own life. You don't have to worry about other people's stories on their Instagram. You just need to get to sleep. I think that
Words
if
to
we all
live by
had
right
that
there.
information, we would be doing better, wouldn't we?
Of course.
But I think prioritizing, spending time with actual real people and then getting your training done and then your study done, I think that would be a really good place to start. I also think a lot of us stress about not getting enough sleep. Our bodies takes what it needs. So if you provide it the opportunity, it'll sleep.
Yeah.
When we were cavemen, I wasn't a caveman, but when our ancestors lived in caves, they never slept for 8 hours without waking up, because that would have been a real threat, having some, grizzly bears walking outside. You wouldn't want to be asleep without being able to wake up in the night. So it is actually important to be able to wake up, okay, it's 3 a.m, and go back to sleep. You don't have to worry about waking up in the middle of the night. That is okay. And I think sometimes we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to have a good night's sleep and sleep all the way through, whereas really that sometimes inhibits our sleep.
I think that's a fantastic answer. And I think that it's something that I've certainly dealt with where, there are days or perhaps a string of several days in a row where you're not getting 8 hours. I mean, you'd be lucky to get 6 sometimes, especially as an athlete or as a coach
Or a
with
coach, yeah.
goodness knows whatever else is going on. But that's an excellent point. I'm a little bit of a sleep diva where if I'm not getting my sleep, I'm frustrated and grumpy during the day. But hey, maybe I need to give myself a little smack on the butt and figure it out. With respect to what you were talking about just a second ago, trying to do everything at once, trying to be a rower and a student and a partner or a friend or whatever else, what kind of advice would you have to the aspiring anything athlete right now, with other things going on in their life, who's looking to like quote unquote do it all? How do you manage the multiple demands of your school, sports, social, etc.?
Yeah, I think that's a really common thing with rowers, that we are trying to juggle a few things. I remember little saying kicking around when I was trying to do university in rowing, that you can do 2 things really well, but you can't do 3. So
Mm-hmm.
I always thought, "Okay, well, single at the moment and I live at home, so I'm just gonna row and I'm gonna do my studies and that's it." But when you introduce family, other things like that, I think it does get harder to work and train and have family at the same time. So I do think that really tune in on how many things you're trying to do well, because you probably can juggle a couple, but then you're going to have to periodize your life like you periodize your training if you really want to be the best partner, mum, or rower or doctor. You can't do everything all at the same time. But they don't have to necessarily stand apart all the time. I think the work-life balance is a misnomer. I think often it's work and life get integrated together, so you
Yeah.
do end up having no balance at some times, but as long as there's at least open communication with the people who are making sacrifices around you, and you're taking kids along to practice or whatever it might be, that's just the way it goes. Don't beat yourself up about not doing everything perfectly. I think everyone makes it work in the way they do.
I love that. Fantastic. The last thing that I wanted to ask you is you've had the opportunity, I'm sure, to work with a variety of fantastic coaches, supervisors at the hospital, at school, professors, family, whoever else. Is there anybody that you would like to thank or kind of, give a little shout out to for the amount of support or a number of people that have supported you kind of throughout your journey?
Absolutely. I'm marrying my best friend, Bill Tate, in April.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So he was a rowing coach when I was rowing, but also we had a really integrated kind of social network, and he understood all of the juggles while we were going through. And so actually, as a doctor now, I live with him, and he was a rowing coach, but now he's a high performance manager in sport. And I think understanding the coach's viewpoint is really important from both the athlete's perspective and the practitioner's perspective as well. So I've learned so much from hearing about how the coach has the struggles that they do and the juggles that all the parts they have to put together. No one has more moving parts going around in their mind than a coach. So I would like to thank Bill both from a personal perspective of the companionship, but also he's taught me so much professionally. Um, and then the reason I'm doing sports medicine is because when I was rowing, I had some amazing sports physician and sports doctors who looked after me. So yeah, my mentor Larry Treese was our sports doctor leading up until 2000, and it was in the Rio cycle. No, it wasn't London cycle. So I was leading up to London, and she was a friend, but also a really good advocate, and her empathy, but also her understanding of the real sort of vulnerability that you have to have as an athlete and a coach. She really made the relationships work. And so she dealt with medical problems, but she saw the whole picture. And I think I really respected that as a clinician. If you can do that as a job rather than be very transactional in a hospital, I think that's a good way to do medicine. So she inspired me, and she continues to. So I'd like to thank her too.
Fantastic. Well, I'm sure they're all very proud of where you've come and where you're headed. And I'm sure that at some point in the not so distant future, you are going to be one of those role models for somebody else that's trying to, achieve something amazing.
Thanks, Zach. Thanks for having me on the podcast too. Congratulations on your series.
Thank you very much. And thanks for joining us today. I know it's a busy day for you. So I want to say thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate having you. And I think that a lot of people are going to get a kick out of what you had to share with us. It was great getting the chance to chat with Alice today and learning about some of her experiences in the boat and in the seemingly never-ending staircases that she seems to find herself in. She had some fantastic insight on balancing multiple aspects of your life simultaneously, and I loved the comparison she drew between the periodization of training and periodizing the important parts of your life when they matter most. If history is any indication, I feel like we're going to see a lot more incredible things coming from Alice in the not so distant future. And I will be sure to share in today's show notes a link to the 2008 lightweight women's quad from the World Championships, the gold medal race that I alluded to earlier during the interview, as well as a link to the study that Alice spoke about that investigated the perceived effects of the female menstrual cycle on elite athlete performance. From my side of the mic, it has been a pleasure chatting with you all and bringing this interview to you, as well as being part of your day. And I hope to see you all back or hear you all back for the next episode that'll drop in a couple weeks. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and subscribe to the Doc Talk channel. It really helps our show grow, and it helps you stay up to date on all things Doc Talk. If you have an idea for a future show, would like to recommend a guest, or just want to pass on a comment or question, feel free to shoot me a note at doctalkpod@yahoo.com. It would mean the world if you shared this podcast with a friend, family member, crewmate, or anyone else who you think might enjoy it. Wishing you all a very speedy week. Until next time, this has been Doc Talk.